All right. So today, also hi, my name's Verge. If you don't already know, I'm with Vedic Cyber God, or Sunny, or whatever you like want to go by.
Hey guys, my name's Sunny. Um, Hi.
All right. Okay, we'll get started then. So you have a very provocative Twitter. Uh,
Do I?
yeah, when you get started, you kind of see immediately with your bio that there's a lot going on.
Well, yeah, my bio's real, so I mean, it's not hard being an 18-year-old half Korean, half Japanese student who's initiated into the Vedas and the fjords. So it's sort of, people on Twitter that want to dogpile you because you're an 18-year-old sexy Hapa girl, but you just have to kick through it, you know, and fuck fuck the haters, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
That's Yeah, dude.
So you actually are a Hapa and not
No, I'm a white dude.
Oh, you're a white dude. Got it.
Yeah, I don't have any Asian in me. Be funny if I did, but I don't.
It
So
does add a little level of it does add a nice level of like comedy to the whole uh I don't know, anime Nazism thing going.
it does, but I'm not.
There's some crackling happening. I don't know what that is though.
Oh, okay. I'll try and stop that.
All right, cool. So what if you had to like kind of sum up then like what? Because you have like a mix of like the Vedas and I don't know this like race realism thing. What do you feel like you're getting across?
What do I feel like I'm getting across? I mean, basically, I think that there's a lot of truth in these sort of ancient documents, and I think there's a lot of people who are maybe they don't like Abrahamic faith, they don't like modern day Christianity, but they're not like atheists, and they don't want to not believe in God. And I think that a lot of people, especially like Europeans, I think, because like nobody looks at like Africans or Mesoamericans or whatever practicing their like native animistic faith to be like cringy or whatever. But when people do it for Europeans, it's cringy. But I think one of the reasons for that is because most of the like basal European texts are, or they're translated by people who are very, 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 very far removed, or they don't exist in general. I think that there's been so much lost in terms of that. But when you actually look at the history, you realize that because of the Indo-European comparative mythology thing, you realize that the really early, early Buddhist texts are a strain of the same philosophy, tradition, or like way of life, religion, whatever you really want to call it, that stem from that sort of same region in the Eurasian steppe. And so any sort of people trying to be like Norse pagan or Celtic pagan, they're mostly dealing off of modernistic works that don't, like everything's contemporary, most of it. So it's a lot harder to really get an understanding of it. But when you deal with these, what we call Eastern texts, but they're really not Eastern texts, they're still very much European, at least in the first-hand texts, like the Rig Vedas and stuff like that, the Avestas. And so I think when you explain that to people and you say there's actually the oldest like written document in the world was written by Aryans, and it's religious, and it's the same people that seeded the whole paganism thing. Some people don't like the word paganism. I don't give a fuck. So, but I don't know. I don't know if that makes sense.
You're using paganism as just like pre-Judeo-Christianity.
Yeah. But and I think it specifically should relate to Europeans. I mean, a lot of people will use the word to mean like pre-Abrahamic beliefs in like the Middle East too. I don't really agree. I mean, obviously it's correct etymologically, but some people will like argue with me and be like, "Oh, that's not what pagan means. It means any pre-Abrahamic belief. So animists are pagan, and Mayan people who worship Quetzalcoatl are pagan." I don't know if I agree with that sentiment. I mean, obviously it's true, but I don't subscribe to like that linguistic belief. I try to keep pagan to mean Europe, but I don't really use the word pagan anyway. I wouldn't consider myself a pagan. I don't like that term. But obviously, if I'm speaking to someone and I'm trying to very quickly say like Indo-Europe, the tradition of the Indo-European people as it was practiced in Europe. I'm gonna say pagan. I'm not gonna say that whole word salad.
Yeah, I get that. So, well, you're kind of using it then in the way that like the text would refer to the pagans. Like if you were reading like the Old Testament and they're talking about pagans, they're talking about a specific
Yes.
region. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So you find that there's a lot of like truths found in it. So like, I don't know. My knowledge of the Vedas is limited, but uh, so like, what specifically would you find? Did you find like, I don't know, is present there that wasn't present in like Judeo Christianity?
Well, Judeo-Christianity has a lot of roots in Zoroastrianism, which is
Mm-hmm.
basically the sort of schism that there was a schism between Vedic practitioners. That there was one that sort of became what we now know as like Hindus and Jains. There was another split off that sort of became what we know as Zoroastrianism, which greatly heavily influenced the Jews when they were in Babylon, and also the kingdom of Mitanni, which you could say is Vedic, you could say it's Zoroastrian. It was sort of a pre-schism sort of thing. There was a lot of violent ethnic conflict over this, but I would say that Judeo-Christianity in general is probably not so bad as most people make it out, especially on this side of Twitter. I know I'm like a shit poster and I like to argue with them and be like crazy, but I think that you can definitely be a Judeo-Christian and still practice, not practice, but you can still understand like what I would call like European Dharma or whatever, whatever
Mm-hmm.
you want to call it. I don't think it's incompatible. I think that if you're like, if you're a churchgoer and you're very dogmatic, I mean, anyone that's super dogmatic isn't going to be able to. There are a few people on Twitter who are Christian, but who still sort of follow this tradition. And obviously, to me, it doesn't really make any sense. It's just sort of swapping these words that already have, words for them in an Indo-European language with Semitic ones.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really get it, but some people seem to like it, and I guess it has more mimetic virility when you're trying to convince people who are already Christian when you use like Abrahamic terms. I'm not talking about your point, though. Let me talk about your point. In terms of that, I think one thing that's really missing is the sort of master morality.
Mm-hmm.
um, that's something that's definitely lost, and that's even lost in Zoroastrianism. That's really the biggest defining line between Vedic thought and Zoroastrian thought. Like more like, I guess you could call it Brahmin thought, but we're talking like 8,000 years ago, 7,000, 6,000, like very early Bronze Age, like the time of when the Indus Valley is around, Mitanni is around. That whole long period of like pre-antiquity is when all of these books were written down, and they're all from oral tradition. If you've read Arctic Home and the Vedas, there's a lot of proof, or well, I don't know if it's proof, but there's a lot of evidence leading heavily towards these books being composed in the North Pole, which sort of rings true to the whole Hyperborea myth.
Oh, all right. Speak more on that. So, how did you wait? What's the proof for the North Pole, or like what's like the reason why people intuit that?
Well, there's a lot of things about that. I'll just talk about some interesting things because I don't have like a book with me or any sort of
Yeah.
notes. But one of the things is the sleeping disorder. There's a sleeping disorder that's really common, circadian rhythm disorder, where you have like an extra hour and a half added onto your thing. And the reason for this, at least hypothesized, is that it would be very beneficial if you were living that close to the North Pole to have a sleeping disorder like this because of the day-night cycle there. It's completely different. So if you have this, your circadian rhythm would be quite furnished to live there. Interestingly enough, also you would be able to live on Mars. And they've looked at people with this circadian rhythm disorder being sent to Mars as the first early colonists because they'd be able to adapt to it so much. You can just Google it right now. It's like the first result. It's like a fucking pop science thing. But the implications of that are really interesting, especially when you consider the people who think that Mars used to have people on it. I don't know if that's true. I'm not going to discuss that, but
Mm-hmm.
I think there's definitely something in there that's interesting, especially because of how common that is in Europeans. And also blue eyes. Blue eyes don't really make sense. I mean, they were supposedly, as we've learned from genetics, they supposedly came about 10,000 years ago. Everyone who has blue eyes, unless you have like Waldenberg syndrome or you're an albino, they share a common ancestor. I don't particularly know if the 10,000 years ago is exactly true, but what I do know is that there was one person who had blue eyes who passed it down, whether the mutation was unique to him or if he was simply the only person who was able to pass down that gene who survived, and then a bunch of other people like him were killed and were not able to pass it down. Because the reason we know this is because it's the exact same gene. It's like we can trace it through the genomic map, right? But we don't really know if that's right where the mutation developed, or if he simply was the only person to survive that thing. So in my sense, it doesn't really make sense for blue eyes to develop and propagate so much around the Black Sea. It would make more sense for them to come about by like mammoth, big game, megafauna hunters who would be, looking for animals very far up north where the day-night cycle is quite fucked up. You know what I mean?
I was told. I don't know if I was told. I don't remember where I got this from. Probably from like Vars or something. Varg. But the blue eyes had to do with the indigenous tribes in like the darkness of the woods of like Germany and like the Nordic areas.
I mean, I don't know. Like, I don't like Varg.
I just follow Varg because I like metal, so that's the only reason why.
No, yeah, no. That part of Varg's history is fucking badass. All that all that shit is fucking base. He's just kind of like, I don't know. I think that he's definitely a good stepping stool into a lot of things. But I think the people who get like obsessed with him and like sort of like worship him are kind of cringe. I think anyone who worships Twitter personalities or YouTube personalities is kind of cringe though. So
I tend to agree.
Yeah, like even people who like follow me, I don't like doing that. It makes me like really uncomfortable. I don't like it. I don't think most people do though. I mean, I guess some people do. They live off of like positive affirmation and shit like that, but I'm not like that. I don't think.
I tend to think that in like the modern age that's actually a big sign of like, I don't know, the modern, I don't know, like my voice is dead by the way, so sorry, it's gonna go in and out.
It's okay, man.
But like the modern like person who's like a netocrat, as like one of my first guests said, they kind of are moving away from like the cult of personality into more like network based interactions and like this play of like, of it's basically like the death of the individual and just focusing on network.
No, yeah, you're completely right. I've noticed that on Twitter, especially on these circles and maybe even a little bit on Discord, that people my age and younger are sort of going towards this like, instead of cult of personality, it's like cult of aesthetics is what I've been noticing, where like a bunch of people will have like similar aesthetics and a similar sort of worldview, and they'll sort of all latch on to that, but they won't latch on to like a cult of personality where they're worshiping people needlessly. And I think that's really interesting, especially, I mean, it makes sense because all the people who are doing this were raised on the internet, and I think only really millennials because like millennials, they had pop stars and then they had the internet.
Zoomers so the younger millennials tend to be a little different. Like I'm like exactly. The bottom couple years of millennial.
What year were you born?
92.
So, 92? Yeah. Damn, you're old.
I am old, yeah.
You're a boomer.
I'm basically
I was born in 1996. If you want to dox me, go ahead. Kill me.
So yeah, no. Fortunately, I grew up on like message boards, so
I think that's good. If like, did you have the internet like really, really young?
Like, from day one.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, see that's why you probably get along with this side of Twitter, because I noticed that even like the Zoomers who are like my age or younger, who aren't like, don't even have the internet in their house because they're like so poor, their parents are like crazy millennials who are like, you're never going to use the internet or you're going to see porn, you'll turn out like me or something. Like those kids just act like millennials because they just watch TV all day.
Yeah, like that's brain dead distinction I've noticed too. The TV versus the internet as your first like communication outlet.
Yeah, they think their lives are movies or like sitcoms. It's hellish. I don't know what Zoomers think our lives are like though. I guess I don't know.
Reality.
Yeah, reality TV. Life is IRL streaming. Life is Ice Poseidon.
So that's cool. So wait, so also you mentioned to bring us back to the point from earlier. So you're talking about like genetic mutations from like the North Pole, and then you mentioned Hyperboreans, which I hear sometimes used, like I know like mythologically that's associated with like a upper caste of like the Greek culture and like mythology, and then but also people like to associate it with like the like missing Aryan tribe or like uh, I hear it's also conflated with like Atlantis. So like, what is your take on Hyperborea or
What
Boreans?
is my take? Um, I mean, when talking about like hyperhistory, um, I think that, and the only reason I'm saying this is because I know whatever I'm gonna say, I'm gonna get a bunch of fucking retards, so, like adding me for the next week about like how blah blah blah. If only you read this book, you will understand how stupid you are. You must read
Reed
this book
Siege.
or something. Yeah, you're like I don't, I don't want to deal with that. So obviously, when dealing with like hyperhistory, you kind of just have to go off intuition, um, and intuitively speaking. I think that there was definitely Hyperborea. I think that was in the North Pole. I don't think that was something that's not there. I think it was just that the North Pole was likely temperate. Um, and I think that people definitely lived there. I think that even if it, like, during the Ice Age, people definitely lived there too. Regarding the story of Hyperborea as it relates to the Greeks, if we're taking a step back and going off of like the Aryanist theory, the story of Hyperborea could just be related to the civilization of there was like a Finno-Ugric tribe that came, and it was around that I like because Hellas is the combination of an Indo-European tribe and another tribe, and there was a fusion of some like there was Finno-Ugric whatever steppe riders that came, and I'm just speaking out of my ass right here because I'm sort of blazed, but um, I could see that being an explanation for that because there was obviously like Uralic people have an interesting civilization in history, and since they actually did invade Greece and subjugate some people and become like their aristocracy, so to speak, I could definitely see that story coming from there because as they would probably likely talk about it in oh, remember the good old days when we didn't live in this Mediterranean hellhole or something. I could see it like that, but obviously that's taking maybe a more logical approach. Making a non-logical approach, I definitely think Hyperborea was real. I think Doggerland was real too.
Oh, it's Doggerland.
Obviously, Doggerland. Well, when I say Doggerland is real, I mean I think that there was definitely probably like some sort of city or something or villages, sort of like maybe like a pre-civilization sort of civilization. And what I mean by pre-civilization is like all of these like from Turkey to like the Indus Valley, you would have these like cities that were basically cities, but there wasn't like a hierarchy. And we define a civilization by hierarchy. So the first civilization was when like there was a natural hierarchy, but these like weird communal farming. Oh, that guy's a fucking asshole. Did you hear that? Did you
Yeah.
pick that up on the mic? Hell yeah, dude, that guy is fucking badass. When you oh, fuck, I forgot what I was talking about. Refresh my
Hierarchy
memory.
and civilization.
Yeah, hierarchy and civilization. In like this like civilization and hierarchy um is what civilization is. So all of these weird communal like Neolithic cities, they didn't consider civilizations, and I reckon that there probably was some on Doggerland. If that was Thule, that would make sense to me. I don't know if that was Thule though. Thule could just be in the North Pole. That could be related to the same Hyperborean myth. But that being full would also make sense. I don't think that Atlantis is the North Pole, but it would make sense that those stories have been conflated so much. I mean, I think that obviously the Ice Age wiped away a lot of stuff, and especially the Younger Dryas effect and the end of the Ice Age wiped away a lot of stuff.
Yeah, that's why everyone has like a flood myth. But
Yeah, and that's really hard to explain to a lot of people who don't read about this stuff and have only taken history classes because most people, especially Europeans or English speakers, they think, oh, you're talking about the biblical flood. And if they don't like Christianity, they just think that the flood never happened and there was no massive geological change that happened at the end of the Younger Dryas period where supposedly civilization right after started. It
Mm-hmm.
didn't exist, and we were chipping flint, and then it just supposedly started, and then there was the fucking pyramids of Giza out of nowhere, and the Sphinx,
Mm-hmm.
all these pyramids everywhere. I don't buy it.
Yeah, no,
But
there's a lot more evidence these days that there were previous civilizations, and
yeah, there was a fucking comet.
yeah, and then obviously even like Graham Hancock, who's getting a lot more attention now, has like shown a lot more stuff, and there's like that stuff in Turkey, and as you're mentioning, so yeah, I'm
Yeah,
becoming more I'm definitely becoming more open to the idea that there was a massive flood, and that's why it shows up in like most cultures, and that's why civilization kind of sprung up so sporadically afterwards, or so
yeah.
quickly.
I mean, even the Sahara was a fucking like jungle.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's like recent history. But just no one fucking talks about it. Like there's so many things that are just unexplainable that we like to pretend are explainable, because you can go on Wikipedia and you can look up the fucking Sphinx, or you can look up the pyramids of Giza, or you can go and look up the what the fuck are they called, the tiki heads
Yeah,
on
the
whatever that.
Easter Island.
Yeah, you can go and look these up and look at the carbon dating and just be like, well, the carbon dating says that this is that many years old, so this is that many years old, but then you have
Like,
all these instances where it's not accurate or it's completely wrong. And I think that some people will take this to mean, oh, carbon dating as a entirely is wrong. I don't think that's true either. But I definitely think that there are things where it's wrong, and there are things that, like, I think specifically, I might be talking on my ass here, but I think specifically with the heads, because they're made out of like solid stone, they had to carbon date stuff like around it to try and guess, because there was literally no way to get an accurate carbon reading from the thing itself. They had to do the site. And that's the case with a lot of things. Like if you look up Sphinx older or newer than previously thought, or wait, no, older is what I mean. Like it was built a long time ago,
mm,
farther than we thought. And even the pyramids of Giza, there are people who argue for it being much older. But then if it's much older, then that means that it predates the Younger Dryas, and that means that it was built during the Ice Age, which doesn't make sense to people because that doesn't fit with the accepted historical cosmology right
mm-hmm.
now. But
No, keep going.
I don't know. I was just saying, like, there are, I think the biggest issue is just like midwits being in universities and thinking that we've we're at the end of history, is that
Yeah,
we figured it all out.
that is becoming funny enough. You and Maya have put me onto the midwit theory, and I feel like it explains so much more than it like at first, like it just feels like a shit post, but then you're like, no, actually this definitely solves a lot of answers a lot of the issues I'm having.
Yeah, I can't. I don't think either of us can take credit for that. I think maybe on this part of Twitter, but for a while it was sporadically used on like poll and stuff. I think the first time I ever heard the term midwit used was, what the fuck was that blogger's name called? There was this blogger that coined the term. It was an article from like 2004 about it was called Why High IQ People Are Silly. And it was talking about people with 110 to 130 IQ.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't mean people past that. It meant why are people 110 to 130 IQ so easily able to be convinced of like propaganda, and why do they have such a good ability to rationalize things that their entire body and vision are telling them are not true? I think, was it fucking Vox Pop? Am I thinking of Vox Populi? I don't know if he coined it. There was also the guy who wrote Genius Famine, which is a really good book. If anyone's
What's the name of
listening
the
to
book?
this,
Genius what?
Genius Famine. It's by fuck, I don't know what his name is. It's
Yeah, I'll look it up and add it.
Carlton. The guy who did the Scientific Hypothesis Journal, and then he got kicked off because of a scandal, because I forget what it's called. I remember the story very vaguely because I read this so many years ago. It probably was when I was like 17. But the guy ran a medical journal where he basically explored all medical theories that were like weird.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is interesting. I'm gonna publish it, and that was what he would do. And so it was obviously like more like a Mia. Like if Mia had a like a medical journal, or I had a
Yeah.
medical journal, it was sort of exploring things that went against the dogma, and then he got kicked off of it, and he created it, but he got kicked off of it because he was in the UK. It was like an official thing.
Yeah.
And he got kicked off of it for I think it was, he said something about AIDS or HIV, and it caused like a massive shitstorm, and he got kicked off of it. But he's still very intelligent. I think he's a Mormon now. He converted to Mormonism, and he thinks that Mormons are gonna save the world.
That's
So
funny.
yeah, I don't know, he's really
I'll get their
interesting.
planet at least.
Yeah. I don't know. I would recommend that book, and I think that also ties very highly into the whole the dimwit, topwit, midwit thing. There's a lot of articles from like 2008, 2009. I remember that term being used quite a lot on
Less wrong.
like those BBS forums that were like history, like EUpedia and shit, where people would talk anthro whatever. There was an anthropology site that was really popular that always had like fan theories and stuff. Like there was that one dude who was like convinced that the Göturk ruins and the Futhark ruins had the same root, which is actually really interesting. But I
This
don't
is
know if
interesting
he's
because I never got into anthropology. Funny, the one archaeology anthropology course I took in college, I like hated it, and it's a whole other story. But it is clear that you've clearly been like super interested. Like, what got you into anthropology and like archaeology at such a young age? It seems like it's very like old and like old vibe to it.
Okay, so I was like a bab or whatever.
You're a what?
I was like a bab. I was like a baby. You know, I'm like a
Oh,
baby, and I'm like, sup y'all, I'm baby. And then I was like maybe like 5 or 6, and I went to, what was that store called that had games, but it wasn't a game. It was like fucking Staples. I went to Staples, and Age of Empires. I'm not joking, by the way.
I don't know. I don't think you are.
Well, I know, but this sounds like a fucking bit. Usually I'm really good at lying like this, just like full course. So that's why I'm saying that I'm not kidding. Um, I was at Staples and I bought Age of Empires. It was either 1 or 2, and I went home and I played it, and I was like, holy fuck, this is cool shit. And I like remember just like reading all of the histories, and so and this was before I really even saw like fucking kids movies and shit. So that was really the first thing that was ever interesting to me was history itself. And then I had like I don't know, that's basically what did it. I played a lot of grand strategy games when I was in my early teens. I don't really play games anymore.
I that was very similar towards me in the late teens. I had to stop actually because Civilization was like taking over my life, and
Yeah.
it was really bad. I would start the game at like 2 p.m. and then next thing you know, it was like 8 a.m. and I was like, what the fuck is going on?
Yeah, literally, I would do that with I would do that with EU3 and Victoria too. I would play it for like 12 hours, and I specifically I like modded the game for me and my friends so we didn't have to do that. And it was like, and then it actually was really fun. But I don't know, I don't play games anymore.
Yeah, I feel like it's important in some respect when you're younger, but definitely ideally you kind of grow out of it and start doing something more productive.
Yeah, I mean, I think with EU3 specifically, I think that what I did probably the most during EU3 was like either, or EU4 and EU3, I guess both of them, was treating it like a world, like an interactive historical world atlas. When I started playing EU3 like a very long time ago, there wasn't a site like that. I think there is now. It's called like geocron.com, and
Mm-hmm.
it goes back to like 3000 BC, and you can just click every single year and you can see basically what was going on in the world and like borders and stuff, which is really interesting.
That was really interesting.
Yeah, and I think for anyone that's interested in any sort of like history or anything, if I mean even philosophy, politics, really anything, I know it's like autistic, and I'm probably autistic for like being the type of person to just fucking spend like 5 hours looking at an interactive atlas and like looking at how things change and wondering why that was. But if you're interested in this stuff, you really should, because I'm not like I like reading things, and obviously like I can read things and it makes sense, but seeing it is a lot different, and I think that it really gives like a different feeling. So like maps and stuff and visual things showcasing history and showing how things change is really important. And I think that everyone should look at stuff like that, because it's a lot different from like reading about the Goths to seeing what actually they did, or like reading about the Mongols. Like, you know, you can read, oh, the Mongols conquered half the world in like a year, but if you click on a thing, you can actually see, oh, it did this and this was a few years, and then, oh, everything fucking collapses. You can see Alexander's empire like split and fall apart, and you can like see like the little tiny Indo-Greek states like slowly, like, you know, I think it's like 400 years later, they're still fucking there, but they're like reduced to these like tiny little city states. It's really interesting, and you can find so many things in history that you never had any idea about, like just very strange little cultures that are just a speck in the world in terms of like everything else. It's really cool. I mean, I like history. I think that everyone should be interested in history to some degree, especially their own history. I did a YouTube video about that because I was mad because some Chinese person was telling me about how great white people were or something, and like sucking European history dick, and it made me like want to like fucking vomit, because I just want people to like respect themselves. And I don't think that a non-white person sucking the dick of like white culture is cool. I think there's a lot of people on this side of Twitter that think that's cool, but I don't. I think that it's gross when any race does it. I think they should just be proud of themselves, not like, I don't know, like, I don't know. I'm not a white supremacist, so I don't. Maybe that's why.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I'm quickly finding, well, not that I really thought, but like much of the people who get labeled white supremacists are generally not. Though your anime Nazi avatar is probably not a great not a great signal if you're not trying to come across that way.
No, it's a Buddhist wheel of peace.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Is it actually? I just saw like a little like I don't know. It looked
Which
like
which one are you talking? Are you talking about the 88? Because that stands for Hail Hitler. So that's probably what you're talking about.
it might be. It was an older avatar. But
Oh.
so speaking of, so with so you were talking a second ago about like civilization becomes a civilization with hierarchy. So I remember I found you because of a thread you made about caste structures and or like caste systems in modernity, and then like I guess eye color was involved there. So like, can you bring that up? I couldn't find the thread when I was looking for it, but
Oh, you found me about that eye color chart.
was that just the chart? But did you not make a thread about it too?
I probably made a thread relating vaguely to it, but I didn't make that image. I just shitposted that. So.
No.
Yeah.
Because I think I remember, yeah. I know the chart definitely I know you didn't make, but I remember just being like interested in like the idea of like the caste system having like maybe it wasn't you, a whatever physical like
Physiognomy. I think it's pronounced physiognomy. I don't like none of them fancy Greek or Latin words. We can just call it people looking or something.
People looking,
yeah.
It has like a people looking attribute to it. So, like,
yeah.
Like on like caste systems then.
This is such a hard topic to discuss because so many people don't have the ability to like. I'm not trying to be mean, but a lot of people just don't have the ability to like understand abstract thought very well.
That's true. That's very true.
And so when you start talking about hierarchy, you start delving into things that are like things within things within things, and hierarchies within hierarchies within hierarchies. And that starts to become very, very confusing for people to wrap their heads around. So most people will either flat out reject it because you cannot possibly ever understand every single hierarchy. So they're just like, well, then there's no hierarchy. Or they find one hierarchy or like meta-analysis, meta-typology of like how people are, and they just roll with it. Like, obviously, you know, everyone with blue eyes is not a fucking king or a fucking priest. Like that's insane. But there are obviously some Wignads that believe stuff like that. But then on the flip side, there are people that believe that physical traits mean absolutely nothing. And obviously this mindset was very common, that they did mean something. a long time ago. As we've come in the 20th and 21st century, that's sort of gone away. But with the advent of like AI, and not specifically just AI, but like quantum neural networking AI that can accurately
I'm hearing a lot of the
predict.
clicking. Wait, sorry. I'm hearing the staticking sound again.
Was it fucking? Did it sound bad?
Oh, we just couldn't hear what you were saying. So wait, so
Okay.
quantum AI.
I mean, specifically with the advent of like quantum networking, neural AI, I think that it's like you can accurately predict uh, personality traits. You can predict if someone's a homosexual. You can predict many of these things that when you say to someone, "Oh, did you know that you can tell that someone's gay by how they look, or you can tell someone's maybe social class by how they look?" They'll say, "Oh, you're fucking crazy," but now it's not so much crazy because there's fucking AIs that you can just upload your picture to,
But the
and
thing is, it was
they're
never
generally
crazy.
true.
The thing is, it was
What?
never crazy because I know my freshman year of college, my psych teacher literally did this experiment and like flashed pictures on the screen, and everyone could tell sexual orientation, the political leanings within like a second of the seeing the person's.
Yeah, and honestly, like I even remember doing that in school. But then when you actually go out in like a non-academic thing and you say that, people just start screaming at you that you're like a racist or you're like
Mm.
bigoted, like, oh, you're judging people. Like you can't judge people based on immutable characteristics, and those immutable characteristics don't mean anything. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think that's true. But going back to your question, tying it in, I think that obviously caste there's like de jure caste and there's de facto caste. Um, I don't know if that's the best word for it, but like
Yeah.
obviously there's like in society as we stand right now, you have an elite which is predominantly Ashkenazi, and those are the highest caste of society. Are their traits high caste? Well, in subjective to them, they are, and a lot of people will even mimic those traits. Obviously, they will sometimes try and mimic European traits to seem more like relatable, but I don't think that's because they view those traits as beautiful. I think that it's because it makes them more marketable when they don't have traits that make them look like like they're Ashkenazi. They want to look like Gentiles, so they look like Gentiles because it makes them more, relatable. Um, but obviously, I don't think that. I think that definitely the physical and the metaphysical are one. So I think that anything that you see in real life has a dual, behind the veil sort of thing. So the way people look, things about their face. Obviously, some are very physical oriented. They don't have any sort of meaning, like jaw stuff. Specifically, like from a. I mean, that's not even true because that could relate to spiritual stuff too, because that's your karma to be brought up in an agricultural society that fucks up your jaw. I mean, I don't know. I think that it all has some meaning, and I think you can't deny that. But what has meaning and what doesn't is probably more complicated. Obviously, this isn't a science, and this is really an intuitive thing until AI like typology gets a lot better. And I mean it is,
Yeah,
but
no, it is definitely.
yeah. I think I saw one recently where it could kind of accurately predict your like big five traits, like the
Yeah, I do know
agreeableness,
that
conscientious.
Big Five is they're doing a lot of stuff where it's very clear in your physical and your people looking that your
Yeah,
traits are like I have very high disagreeableness and allegedly that's very clear. Um,
yeah. I have. When I take that test, it gives me like zero conscientiousness and like
I
a
have very
hundred
low.
percent
So
extroversion. Yeah, I'm really disagreeable. I have really low agreeableness too.
yeah, the internet kind of makes that accentuates that.
I will see to some degree I agree with that, but that's only if you grew up on like message boards like we did, where
Yeah,
where it didn't have like your fucking I work at Panda Express and I'm a tweeter and tweets are not, fucking endorsements, blah blah blah. Like those people are very agreeable, I would say,
definitely.
because
I
they're
really miss the flame wars of old. Like I just don't people who nowadays just don't understand like how much fun it was to like be in endless page arguments.
no, yeah, like people also have like like huge egos about it too. Like if you get mad on the internet, obviously it's like funny as fuck, but like people, you can like read like 2004 flame wars between people arguing about like whether fucking honeydew melons are better than like watermelons, and they're like threatening to
Perfect.
like kill each other's family in all caps. And if you're like a Facebook person and you've never really used message board, you'll read that and be like, oh my god, this is so crazy. I can't believe people back then were so hateful and violent. But in reality, those people were bold-faced giggling while typing that stuff. And
Exactly.
just and that's what was happening. But a lot of people on Twitter don't even realize that. Like if you start using all caps, they're like, you're fucking mad, bro. Like but then they type in like perfect fucking grammar, and they add like a superfluous. That's a very funny word because it means the word itself is superfluous, but so it's stupid to use. But they use like very like French words when they're angry. I've noticed a lot of people, like a lot of these midwits on Twitter, use with the more anger they get, the more French words they use. Just an observation.
You can't be really you can't express true anger anymore because you get insta banned or suspended, or it's really obnoxious.
No, yeah, like well, I don't know. I can't believe that I haven't gotten banned yet, but I think it's because I don't like I know how to like not get angry. Well, I don't get angry at the internet, but I think maybe some people do, where they just think it's funny to like I don't know, say like the N word like at like Obama or something.
Yeah, and then it's a suicide. They're committing Twitter suicide.
They're martyring themselves. I mean that's usually what I think is the issue, is that these people name on Twitter is like Gas the Kikes 1488, and like and then they're like, I don't understand how I got banned. This is so fucked up. Twitter is censoring conservative personalities. Like, I don't know. I I think that it's really easy not to get banned on Twitter. I don't think that it's really that difficult. I think that obviously like you can't get mad though. Like you do have to watch how you act, because like there are so many times on Twitter where the person arguing with me is like doesn't even. There's this thing that happens a lot on Twitter, which I like. It's kind of like YouTube comments, where like you'll talk to someone, and then someone randomly will reply to what you're saying, and what they're saying, like they're arguing something that you can't even abstractly and empathetically understand how they arrived to that conclusion, thinking that that's what you meant. And then you wonder if their first language is English, and then you find out it is, and you're just sitting there like, I don't even understand how this person thought what I was saying meant what he thinks it was saying. And then the argument or conclusion that predicates that is like so stupid that you don't know whether to reply and argue against his stupid point, but then vindicating that he thought the weird thing that he thought you were saying was right, or to just call him like a retard. But you can't call him a retard because then he'll report you. But if I was on Discord or some other, or like Telegram or some other platform, or on an old BBS forum,
You light them up.
you just say you're a fucking retard, like, and that's it, and then you just go about your day. But on Twitter, you have to like, you kind of have to like, I do this a lot when I'm arguing with people. Like, you have to like play the midwit. You have
Yeah,
to like act like them. Like, I don't like being the type of person to like link fucking medical articles to prove my point. I just like having discussions. I don't like having debates and arguments.
it's very
Like
Reddit
that's
tier.
Yeah, it's very Reddit tier. So, but there are certain people who like will literally, like you'll say like, just Google this, just literally just look up what I'm saying, and there are plenty of people with PhDs who are taking this concept seriously and have done medical studies, and then they won't believe you. So you just have to like send them like 50 fucking medical journals. You just have to look up like this happens a lot when I'm talking about genetics on Twitter,
Mm-hmm.
because people still think that they're posting on like Wikipedia in like 2000, before we sequenced the human genome, which I think was 2014, 2013.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't realize how much progress we've made in trying to figure out like the genetic histories of populations that before we only had sort of vague ideas from linguistic traits. We know way more now, and it's fascinating to really understand the history of all these complex people. I mean, obviously, like even like the Australian Aboriginals, we thought they were monolithic, and it turns out that there's about three very, very genetically distinct groups that came together to make Australian Aboriginals. And the three main Australian Aboriginal groups, the northern ones, southern ones, and the desert ones, like the Bushmen ones. I guess I shouldn't call them Bushmen because that usually means Khoisan, but the ones in the bush, they all have very different like physiognomy. They have different like ways that they're adapted to their environment. It's really interesting. But for a long time, anthropologists thought they were basically one group, but it turns out they have very different histories. And that there were even those pygmies that lived in the islands off of one of the little, I think it was Darwin or something. They were like little pygmy people, just like the Negritos of the Pacific, Indonesia and Malaysia and
Mm-hmm.
all that. It's just really interesting. And I think that a lot of people don't touch this, especially in my sphere. At least the sort of dumb ones, the dumb right wingers, won't touch this. But I think that one of the really most interesting things in support of like uh, specifically like race realism and stuff is just looking at how much research they've done on Australian Aboriginals and Africans, and it's really interesting. Like whenever I will meet like and I meet this a lot. Like I'll meet people who are like, yeah, Australian Aboriginals, they're black, or they're fucking niggers or whatever. But I think it's really retarded because they're not related to them at all,
Mm-hmm.
and especially when dealing with like Khoisan, they're not Bantus. When people refer to black people, they're referring to specifically Bantus, right? And
Wait, so isn't Bantu like the southern region though?
no, Bantus are from specifically the I guess the Gold Coast area, the
Oh,
Ivory
really?
Coast, Gold Coast. Yeah, they're from the very far thinking the western part of Africa, like right under the Sahara where
Mm-hmm.
Liberia is. That's where the Bantu homeland is. And
Okay.
they migrated by the time that we took slaves. They had migrated down to basically like what is the fucking? It's Angola or
South Africa?
Mozambique.
Cause
Yeah,
for some reason I feel like I remember reading about the Bantu like in and around South Africa, but I'm just making that up.
no. The Bantus are from South Africa.
Oh, okay.
Like this is one of the really interesting stories of history, is that the the Bantu tribes um, of Western Africa slowly and like violently conquered their way south, basically ethnically exterminating the Khoisan and Pygmy peoples. By the time that the British had colonized Southern Africa and the Dutch had been there, the they you know how like when the British met the Zulu and all that, the tribe that the Zulu were chasing were Khoisan people. They were Capoids. And that was sort of the whole history of this whole migration trend, was them slowly coming and conquering these people. I mean, even in South Africa today, you still have the Khoisan and Khoisan descendant people allying with the whites because they see the Bantus as the oppressors. Even in Zimbabwe, you have the Matabele, who are a Bantu tribe, and you have the Shona, who are mostly a Capoid tribe. And the Matabele were the ones who were in favor of taking over the government of Rhodesia, and the Shona were the ones who were more loyal to the whites and were usually protected by them because they liked them. But the thing is, that's interesting, is that the Capoids have much lower IQs than the Bantu people. But the Khoisan are able to eat 2,000 to 3,000 calories just surviving naturally in the environment, and they can perfectly remember their pathways, and it's insane. They're so interesting. But the thing is that the Bantu considered them basically as fauna. There there are there are there are like quotes of like Zulu people, like Kingsmen and stuff, talking about how the Khoisan are essentially fauna, and that
Oh,
they hate them. They're subhuman. They're dumb. They don't like them at all. And it's just really interesting, the story of all these places that. And I think it's important for a lot of these people in this sphere to learn about this stuff, because I don't think it's a good look when you when you just call everyone from Africa black, or like anyone that's skin color is black. I think black obviously means something very specific, and except in
Racial
America.
categories in the U.S. are much different than like
Yeah,
actual cultural categories.
yeah. I mean, even white as a term is very like specific, and people will pretend that it's not when it's convenient for them, but then at other times they'll pretend that it does mean European. But then other times they'll say, well, Asians are white and all these other people are white, and it's like, okay, well, what does white mean? And then they use that argument. But that's why just use the term Indo-European, and then it makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Then you're like, oh, okay, that makes sense to me. Like, simple as. Like, even with, like, I think the terms black and white are pretty stupid. I think that people who latch onto those past trying to appeal to like dumb people, like behind closed doors, I guess is what I'm saying. If you really latch on to these terms behind closed doors as like a god, like,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's not a good look. It's kind of cringe because it's not reality. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I've literally been called like a fucking like a lib cuck before because I was trying to explain to someone that the Khoisan were not black, or that the Ethiopians were not like black, or Somalians weren't black, because they're
Mm-hmm.
a completely different, distinct genetic group from Bantu people.
So
And I don't know.
that is interesting. So um, that would imply, I mean, which makes perfect sense, but like still, it seems like unintuitive that there's like significantly more like racial subgroups than we would have otherwise like mentioned, right? So like right now we kind of like make lines based on nationalities and like or like regions, right? Like Mediterranean versus I don't know, whatever, this part of like Europe or whatever. But like in if we're going by like the genome and like the different like I don't know haploid groups, then that would imply that there's like dozens of racial subcategories or whatever.
Oh yeah, I mean, definitely. There's you can take the genetic distance information and you can plug in like different parameters. Like, I have an image that I from this one Harvard study that was different uh, total genomic study worldwide concludes that there are like about three. I'm trying to remember the name of the study exactly, but I'll find it. It's a Harvard study that conducted research from a conglomeration of a bunch of genomic studies all
If
over
you
the
send it to me,
world.
I'll put it in the description afterwards.
Okay, I will. Um, and it concludes, it does the whole, like, all of these different ethnic groups from every single continent in the world, and you can look at every single level of like data crunching. So if you look at K2, you have only two races. You have Eurasians and you have Africans, and that's it. Simple as. You can keep going over and over and over, and you slowly start to see this divide, and you can literally keep going until like 100. Now, the study that I linked doesn't do that, and I don't have the software from from the study to do this. If I did, I would, and I kind of want to. Sometimes I want to go and pursue a PhD just to do studies like this, and to get access to the software. But the study goes up to 32. K equals 32, and even just looking at that is so interesting to see how many different parts of what you would think is a monolithic ethnic group are actually a bunch of different tribes, a bunch of different families. I mean, you can really keep going up and up, and it becomes so interesting to see. I mean, it's history. It's right there. It's your genetic history. It's how these people's history affect themselves. I mean, you can, like, just going on there and looking at that image. For instance, yellow means Asian. Well, I don't know if that was racist of them, because that's not my color. That's what they put. So I just want all the haters and racist. Asian on the thing is yellow. American too is also red. So I don't know about that. But European is blue. African is brownish red. Again, I don't know about that. And yeah, and like green and purple are essential. Well, purple is like Australoid. Um, and you can just look at these populations, like Central Asian populations specifically. I think are the most interesting, because a lot of these populations, like Turkic and Tatars and all those Central Asian populations, have had so much mixing from all the massive steppe Khanate. You can look at one that has maybe 10%. At like K20, it would be like North European, like another 10% uh, that Iranian Chalolithic. I call it Elamoid because I don't like saying that whole long word. And that was basically the first civilization where those people existed.
Yeah.
Um, you have
Mesopotamia
like
area.
no, yeah, in that sort of area, Elamoids. There's because there's two different Neolithic groups. There's the Mediterranean Neolithics, and then there's the Iranian Neolithics, and they both are kind of genetically different. They have the same root ancestor, which is also the same ancestor that the North Europeans, what they're called North Europeans are called, and the same root ancestor that the A&E people have, which is the ancient North Eurasian people. They all share like a root ancestor, but varying degrees of going into Europe and doing it. But as I was saying, you can look at these percentages, and you just look up like I don't have the image in front of me, but like Hutu, Butu, whatever, and you'll look at Hutu, Butu, and then you'll look at Buku Muku, and Buku Muku, it's 30% European and 70% Asian or whatever. It's 70% Mongolian, but then you'll have one that's like 70% Siberian and 30% European. And for a lot of people, they don't see much difference between, at least in their mind's eye, between maybe a Siberian and a Mongolian, but they clade it as, or they group as different clades. And when you start to notice the differences, I can definitely tell the difference between just this little tiny percentage of this or that. Or you can swap out, like you can start to tell when people have just little tiny amounts of admixture. I do this every single day. I'm fucking probably crazy, but when I look at people, I try to guess what their heritage is. And usually in America, I'm right. When I guess, I'm like, are you Slavic? Are you like half Slavic, half like French? And they'll be like, I am. I don't know how you knew that. You're creepy, and I'm not gonna talk to you anymore. But yeah, I don't like. It's interesting, and it's something that instantly clicks in your pattern recognition, like software in your head. It's especially when you start to see the percentages and you start to understand, like, oh, the Finnish have more A&E component, and they have a very slight, like something like 3 or 4%, like Mongoloid admixture, and then the Danish people and Norwegians and Swedes don't have that. But then those ones have a little bit of the Sami admixture, the Norwegians and Swedish, which the Danish don't do. And then you start to realize why Swedes, Danish, Norwegians, and Finnish, and even Estonians all look kind of similar, but you can really distinctly point out, and you can even tell if someone's from the north of those countries or the south of those countries. It's the same thing with Germans or English people. You can, especially with English people. With English people, it's very easy. It might be because I'm an Anglo, but you can really tell when someone, even in America, is descended from what type of Anglo family they're descended from. If they're from lower class or upper class, if they're from an aristocratic family, if they're Norman. Like the Norman genes are very, 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 very obvious with those. The typical like Anglo beady-eyed, black, greasy hair sort of thing is very typically Anglo. Like Oswald Mosley, 100% Norman Anglo. I love the guy, but it's true.
Interesting. So yeah, so at the end of the day, there's like, it's much like I guess like the parallel would be like dogs or cats, where after our self-domestication, we kind of are left with like a bunch of subspecies and varieties that have distinct features that one could like parse out if you actually take the time to like to follow the lineage.
Yeah, like there's so much mixing within humans, and like the way that I think people really misunderstand evolution because they don't realize that inbreeding and outbreeding both play a very, very important factor in the development of specific ethnic groups. Most of the examples of rapid evolution that we've observed over the past 50 or so years, like the one with the lizard in the Mediterranean Sea that they transplanted to another island that was 50 miles away, that within, I think, 30 years of the study had gone from being a bug-eating lizard to developing a cecum and being able to digest leaves and became fully vegetarian. There's also the instance of in the Galapagos Islands, there was a bird that went to one of the other islands for some reason, and then mated with, and we observed this happen. It was a single male bird flew something like 10, 20 kilometers to another Galapagos island, mated with a female, which is very rare because usually cross species stuff doesn't happen, then had kids, and then the kids all bred with each other and the parents, and then it created like a weird ethnic clade, and then they almost all died except one or two, and it was a male, and then one of his, I think one of his kids, like his female kids, and they had like 20 kids, and then from those 20 kids, the population kept itself alive. I think it's a blackbird Galapagos rapid evolution. If you look that up, you'll see what I'm talking about. People, and this is an entirely new genetic hybrid clade formed itself in 30 fucking years, and a lizard developed a fucking cecum to digest plant matter. I mean, I think that people have a misconstrued idea of evolution, especially when it comes into retroviruses even. I mean, how the fuck did that lizard get it? I would say it's probably a retrovirus or some sort of parasite. Actually, I think in the study they said that the lizard had digested some sort of parasite that had been that now all of them had this parasite that helped them digest plant matter as well as the cecum. So I think that a lot of people, especially when looking at humans and thinking about all the bottleneck events that we've had. I mean, how many times has the blackbird situation happened for humans, or even the lizard situation? In one situation, there's a ton of inbreeding and a hybridization. In another one, it's just simple environmental factors that somehow, I don't fucking know how. And I think that any fucking geneticist that tells you that they know how is lying to you. And I think that that's one of the biggest issues, is that you have all of these people who it's within their own ego's fucking prerogative, it's their MO to like pretend that they know what the fuck is going on. I don't know anything. I'm a fucking retard. I think most people are retards. And I think that all that matters is, I think that once things stop being interesting to you, your head is too far up your ass.
That's fair.
If nothing is interesting to you, and there's no theories that interest you, and that the world just makes complete sense, then you're just up your own ass. And I think a lot of people are like that, where they get so stuck in their ways, and especially with evolution. And it's such a hard thing to talk about because people don't really understand it, but it's fascinating with stuff like the rapid evolution. I mean, especially when just looking at humans. I mean, just how much there was that book that got recommended to me. I didn't read it, but I read I read the review, which basically went through the whole thing about how America was descended from, I think, 4 distinct genetic groups, and those 4 distinct genetic groups from England really, really shaped the course of American history. It was like Puritans, Quakers, and Borderers. I guess it was just 3.
Maybe like the Scots Irish in the South, and
yeah, and that's, well, the Scots Irish were the Borderers.
The Borderers. Okay.
Yeah, because I guess they're from the border between England and Scotland. They're not actually Scots or Irish. They're just Anglo-Saxons from the border who then got sent to Northern Ireland to colonize it. And then the people who were there were like, I don't want you here. And they sent them like all en masse. They got deported. Like, it was the biggest amount of like people that had ever come to the U.S. at that point. And then they went to Pennsylvania, which is where the whole border thing started. And the people in Pennsylvania, the Quakers, didn't like them, because this was like the first migrant crisis, I guess, in America's history. But they were like, yeah, we don't like you. We're going to kick you out to the Appalachian Mountains. And then they were so good at living in the Appalachian Mountains and like on the frontier.
Still there.
Yeah, they're still there, because their entire history was just them getting fucking massacred by British or I guess English and Scottish kings, just because they happened to be on the border.
Yeah. Well, I tend to agree with the notion that everyone's kind of had, a lot of people have their head up their ass, and clearly, like, the rhetoric around evolution has been taken to like a biblical level, and as such, people have a hard time like treating it like it actually is, like a theory regarding evidence, and then that it should be malleable because of it. And like Darwinism isn't like its own religion in and of itself.
Yeah, you have too many people who just worship the idea of evolution and don't even want to think about, like, it's just like, oh, I don't know. It's just, there are so many things that are just very obviously, I feel like a lot of people just don't think, and I don't know, like
That is
just
very true. A lot of people just don't think.
and or a lot of people don't think, and then their first initial reaction or like thought process in response to the thought they had was to be like, well, that doesn't make sense, so I guess it's the exact opposite, and that's what I'm gonna believe forever, concretely, black and white, dogmatically. Like, it's you have like two sides of the same
Sounds like
coin.
Reddit.
Yeah, exactly. Like on Reddit, and that's what you have all those fucking retards on Reddit. They're either like they suck Darwin's dick and they're like, this is the coolest thing in the world, or you have the creationists who are like, this is the right thing, and this is the coolest thing in the world. And there's no agreeing, there's no like middle ground between those two things. And I don't know. I think that specifically how this all plays into evolution and stuff, it's so cool to actually read about and talk about, especially retroviruses. I think that anyone who's interested in this, look up retroviruses and their role in human evolution. Not just human evolution, but evolution in general. There's so many theories that would explain so many very vastly strange things in the I guess mammalian biome that would be easily explained by retroviruses that we can't answer now. And I think that's, just look into it. It's very interesting, and it fills up a lot of the holes and explains a lot of the evidences of rapid evolution, where it's not like a genetic clade inbreeding and then outbreeding. It's like a genetic clade that just randomly, I don't know, they don't have any food, and so these little lizards start munching on leaves, and then within 60 years somehow these fuckers have a developed cecum that can like fucking digest plant matter, which is, it's just, and there's not a single thing within their entire order of species that has a cecum. Like, it's just, I don't know how this stuff happens.
Yeah, it's a mystery to us. We don't know nearly as much as we think we do. But
Yeah.
that we're getting towards the time limit here. But thank you very much for coming on. This was like very fascinating. Do you have anything you're working on right now, or like anything you want to like promote?
No. I mean, I'm working. I don't know. I wouldn't say I'm working. I just, once in a while I get sort of the desire to do stuff, and I do it, but I wouldn't say that I'm like actively working on anything. I do stuff as I want to.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right now I don't know what I'm doing, but that's awesome. Well, thanks for coming on. I'll be sure to like link your Twitter in the description, and please send the studies over so that people can like check it out.
Okay. Yeah. You guys should follow my Twitter. It's at, and then it's the
No, I'll link it. They'll be able to get to it. But it's Vedic Cyber God.
I see. No, some of my followers are hard of hearing, so I'm just trying to be responsible to them. _ FRGOD. It's Vedic Cyber God _ You'll figure it out.